Hi, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be a speaker for this class under the project of Eurasia. Today, the topic I will talk about is cultural inclusion and its dilemma. Let's see the significance of topic. The foundation idea uh, is basically that it pursued to establish a harmonious, peaceful, stable, and prosperous global community beyond the wars. What could be worse? Uh, it could be religious war, maybe ethnic, the war or cultural war or linguistic war. So today's lecture is related to cultural war. Also, this topic is related to how to embrace different culture. Nowadays in each country, there are a lot of immigrants and emigrants. It is called the transnational phenomenon, right? So multicultural societies and voice of minority rights are increasing. Also, I will talk about the dilemma of cultural inclusion, looking at some cultures that people cannot be tolerant. The question of why we are not tolerant of them uh, is today's, point of lecture. Uh, okay, let's see about definition of cultural inclusion. If you have an open mindset to others, respect other culture, you care about others regardless of belief, religion, culture, ethnos, etc., then we can say you are tolerant. The term tolerance, or inclusion is similar with the term tolerance, but there is a little difference between the two terms. The term inclusion has more active meaning, such as creating an environment where everyone feels welcomed, respected, valued, and empowered to participate fully, and also fostering more harmonized atmosphere. So if you interact with people from diverse cultural backgrounds, we can say your CQ is high. CQ refers to cultural intelligence. So in this lecture, I will use both terms, tolerance and inclusion, and we'll talk about dilemma of cultural tolerance and inclusion. Okay, let's see about the theoretical background of cultural inclusion and cultural tolerance. It is a cultural relativism because it is the root of cultural inclusion and tolerance. Early 20th centuries, there was an American cultural anthropologist, Franz Boas. According to him, the culture is a kind of historically formed products in its certain environmental and social context. So each culture has relatively unique value. So there should not be any value judgment of, for example, superiority of culture or inferiority of culture. Okay, let's see some the more term briefly related to this cultural relativism. There are some opposite concepts of cultural relativism based on cultural superiority and inferiority. They are cultural absolutism, ethnocentrism, and Orientalism. For example, what about cultural absolutism? For example, if you say, my culture is absolutely right or best, like that, you are cultural absolutist. What about ethnocentrism? It's a kind of view of a self-culture oriented view. Okay. What about Orientalism? According to Edward Said's Orientalism, it is a kind of a Westerner's view to the Orient or Oriental culture. There's strong stereotyped ideas and prejudice. So all these concepts are similar term, which is against cultural relativism. What about cultural imperialism? It goes further than the above terms. Cultural imperialists wants to expand their cultures to the colonized people, for example, and justify assimilation of these people into their culture. What about cultural flunkism? It's an attitude of following and serving a more powerful country. So the colonized people believe that strong country's culture is better than, their own culture. It's a kind of cultural flattery. So cultural imperialism is often accompanied by cultural flunkism. From this perspective, both cultural imperialism and cultural flunkism can be dangerous. Let's see an example. You know about the colonization history of Algeria? Algeria had been colonized for 130 years by France. Algeria got the independence in 1962. There was one Algerian psychoanalyst, you know, Franz Fanon. Around the time Algeria got the independence, he witnessed many, many Algerians who were suffering from some kind of mental illness. So he studied about this and he found the reasons. Under the French rule, many Algerians assimilated into French culture. That is, you know, they acted like French. They spoke French like French people. But when Algeria suddenly got the independence, they become confused about their identity. According to Fanon, the fact that Algerians had been so strongly assimilated into French culture means that they had denied their own identity, and denying their own identity developed their mental problems. Okay, let's see another example of Orientalism. It is racism in South Korea. In this case, we will see the stereotype on skin color, which is based on Orientalism. In school in Korea, there used to be a after-school English classes as an additional ones. So parents needed to recruit one native English-speaking teacher because the classes were on a paid basis. Parents needed to pay for the English teacher. So parents committee had a meeting for getting an English teacher. There were two candidates for English teacher. One was an African American man, and the other one was an American white man. Who was selected? You can guess. Without considering the candidate's expertise and academic ability, parents determined only by seeing skin color. So, there is a historical background why Korean old generation have this kind of stereotyped idea. Korean Peninsula is geographically isolated from other countries, for a long time, even until the dismantlement of Cold War regime. It means that Koreans have lived in strongly monocultured society. There is no other culture. So Koreans, basically older generation, have not been familiar with other cultures. But now, young generation is, totally different. They're more tolerant of other cultures. Okay, let's see about the science of skin color. Racists view skin color with a dichotomous structure of dark skin and white skin. They consider people with dark skin uncivilized like barbarians, amoral also, while people with white skin civilized, moral, and superior or excellent. This kind view was accelerated by the classification of race by skin color: Negroid, Mongoloid, Caucasoid. Today, this is not science. This is not science. Science of skin color, you may know, the skin color corresponds to amount of sunlight. More concretely, ultraviolet. If you are exposed to sunlight, your skin become dark. It is from the protection of a mechanism of our, the body. It's called melanin pigmentation. In this regard, human cannot be classified by skin color. In fact, all humans are genetically 99.9% identical by the, scientist. Let's see some cultures that you may not be tolerant of. If you are not tolerant of them, you think about them. Why? Here, a large tomb. Several people buried under the tomb. We see one man. He must have been king or powerful leader. Near him, there's three girls and two more men and woman. When the leader died, some people near him were killed. How come? How did it come? In ancient times, powerful figures and kings constantly feared being murdered or poisoned by people around them, no? Around him. Therefore, the powerful man needed a powerful protection device or system. This protection system was that when king died, those around him were also killed and buried with king. This ensured that those around the king wished the king a long life. Archaeologically, this kind of a human sacrificial burial were popular in ancient times in China, Korea, Japan, Egypt, Sumer, by king and Scythians. How horrible this custom is. Some people near him had no way to survive. Okay, let's look at another, case of custom happened in Korea. There's some memorial gates in Korea. These gates, the two wives who were very faithful and loyal to her husband and parents-in-law, even who were following her husband to his death. This gate is one of them. In this gate, she was a wife of local official in Joseon Dynasty in Korean Peninsula just 3 centuries ago. Her husband died early. Since his dying, the wife had never left the house and with utmost sincerity taken care of her parents-in-law, who were both blind. Generally, in Korea, at that times, women and daughter-in-law were strongly pressured to be sacrificed to their husbands and parents. There is a disease name, 화병. Have you heard that? 화병. It's a kind of a anger syndrome. It is officially registered, as a disease name internationally. 화병, yeah, is a kind of anger syndrome, and that appears in women who are unable to express their anger and are suppressed. Nowadays, on the other hand, there could be men's 화병, right? Okay, let's see another example of a woman being oppressed in Korea. It was in 1636. There's Manchu, in Qing Dynasty. Manchu invaded Joseon. Joseon, it's the previous name of Korea. And Manchu took many Joseon women captive. When the women returned, they were called 환향녀, which meant a dirty woman who had already lost her chastity. And her son called 후레자식, which meant like a bastard. They were alienated from their society. Okay, this is a woman's foot. It is severely deformed, small, and with this foot, she was not able to walk properly. But she was considered the most beautiful, in China. Girls' feet couldn't grow because from young age, all four toes except a big toe were forcibly bent and tightly, bound with clothes, preventing further growth. This had been practiced for over 1,000 years and disappeared only in the 1930s. The origin of this bookbinding custom, are firstly, when women's small feet are considered beautiful and sexy, as I mentioned above. And secondly, women's small foot were a symbol of wealth, richness. Wealthy women only had such a small foot, and these women were not required to do any physical labor, any physical work. Historically, China had a large male population than females. Foot binding custom prevented women from walking properly and from escaping from their husbands. Anyway, you can imagine how much pain and deformity they were suffering from this. Okay, let's go to the Middle East and Africa. Yeah, here's a girl. Her name is Tiba Al-Ali. She was an Iraq girl. She had been a YouTuber in Turkey since 1917. At the time, she was 17 years old only and a very independent, energetic woman. Her videos mainly about her daily life, her fiancé, and makeup. A few years ago, she visited her parents in Iraq. While she was sleeping, her father strangled her, and she was killed by her father. But Iraq law is very lenient on father who kill his daughter, and the father received only light punishment. This kind of practice of honor killing still occurs in some countries, in the Middle East and Africa. Okay, let's see another practice of FGM. What is FGM? It's a female genitalia mutilation. It's a kind of female circumcision. This practice is one of the oldest in world history. It has lasted about 4,000 years. It is an ongoing custom. The practice is performed by removing part of girls' genitals. According to WHO statistics, now this occurs in 28 countries around the world, and 2 to 3 million women undergo this FGM procedure every year. Of this, about 6,000 die from side effects of circumcision. Genital mutilation is performed not in general hospital setting, not in hospital, but in a conservative way by using a sharp just blade to remove that. Therefore, these women are at risk of, the severe bleeding, sepsis, or infection, even shock. That is why many women die from, this procedure of FGM. The origin and meaning of these customs are very, horrifying. It stems from the superstitious belief, superstitious belief that women should not have any kind of sexual pleasure because it is devil's playthings. So they didn't permit any kind of sexual pleasure for women. Does it make sense? Okay, let's see. Bride kidnapping, it has occurred in basically nomadic society. In Central Asia, still it happens. In Kyrgyzstan, 8,000 to 12,000 cases per year occur. Among them, about 5,000 girls are forced into marriage against their will. In rural area, the 1/3 of all marriages are from non-consensual kidnapping. It means without girls' agreement. Traditionally, from their childhood, their marriage was decided by agreement in advance between the parents of both sides in Central Asia. It's kind of a pre-arranging system for their future marriage. In particular, the father had the right to decide on marriage without his daughter's consent. At that time, it's very patriarchal, man-centered society. This was a general way by their custom, which called, the adat. However, sometimes bride kidnapping happened. There are two forms of bride kidnapping: consensual and non-consensual. Consensual bride kidnapping is that both sides have an agreement in advance for the kidnapping style marriage because it is an economic way for those who are poor or do not have enough money to give some amount of column. Column is bride price to bride family. Also, they should cover, the wedding expenses. So anyway, it could not be a problem because there were both sides agreements as well as it is not against the law today's law. However, the kidnapping of a girl without her agreement is serious. Traditionally, forced kidnapping without girls' agreement are rare as they could lead to serious conflict between both sides and their clans. The worst thing for a kidnapped bride is that there is no way for her to return under their custom once they are kidnapped. No? Her parents and relatives do not allow her to return and try to avoid any further over the kidnapping. If she returns, she will not be able to no longer marry another man. Hence, there is a saying, a bride who returns is bad, according to their adat. The man who kidnapped her is already her husband, and she already belonged to his family, so she has no choice but to endure it. Under current national law, bride kidnapping is illegal, of course, and punishable by some amount of fines or imprisonment. But it's still happening in Central Asia, especially in rural Kyrgyzstan. You know, I've heard from my students in the class, in case of Kazakhstan, yeah, it happens. But first, the bride kidnapping without, the girl's agreement is very rare. Only bride kidnapping style marriage happen for the economic way for wedding ceremony. Anyway, you may not be tolerant of this kind of custom we have seen above. From a relativistic perspective, those practices can be embraced. However, there are universal values that conflict with these particular, the values in cultures. Let's look at international human rights law, which is recognized a universal value today. As you see, all humans are born free, equal in dignity and rights. Everyone is entitled to all rights and freedom. Everyone has the rights to life, liberty, and security of person. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude, slavery. Everyone has the right to protection of the law against such interference or attacks. So, in summary, every human being is treated as a precious being. No one has the right to use his or her right to destroy the rights of others. Freedom, equality, happiness, diversity, democracy, respect for life, this kind of term, this kind of value are very important. Let's see about the dilemma and paradox of cultural inclusion. Uh, I can say we are basically tolerant to others, but what about the above cultures that we have seen? The value of cultural values and the universal values are in conflict. So we are faced, with the dilemma where we cannot respect both conflicting values, but we keep in mind is that there are paradox of tolerance. This paradox means that if we tolerate intolerant behavior, a tolerant society will be destroyed. In this regard, we do not tolerate practice that violate universal value. Today, each country adopts international human rights law in its state's law. However, there are still customs that we cannot tolerate or embrace. You are supposed to think about whether there is any violation of a universal value in your culture. Okay, we have seen the paradox of cultural tolerance and inclusion. Also, let me give you another example of paradox. It is paradox of equity. For example, the DEI principle, internationally, the official organization or enterprise adopted this kind of DEI principle. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity means ensuring that opportunities and resources are distributed fairly to everyone. This doesn't mean giving everyone the same, but rather focusing on providing a fair starting point for those who have historically been disadvantaged by providing additional support. Anyway, there is a controversial over whether the application of this principle leads to much reverse discrimination. So now many companies and organizations are eliminating this principle or reducing DI policy. The reason is that it produces reverse discrimination due to many priorities and rewards given to minorities. In this age of AI, now the values that humans pursue, behavior, practice, communicate is very important. It is said that the singularity point is approaching. What is singularity? It means the point where all transcend human intelligence. AI transcend human intelligence. Pessimist futurists say humans will face dystopia with AI technology. However, optimist futurists say we will live in utopia. But whether we will have a utopia or dystopia depends on the safety of AI, right? Everything we think, say, communicate, becomes data of AI. It will be reflected in AI. So for AI safety, it must become human-friendly AI. They prioritize universal value. Okay, look at these pictures. This is George Washington, in America founding father. It is a AI image for George Washington. There is Indian George Washington, African, the George Washington, and even Asian George Washington, right? So, this AI maybe had been adopted by DEI principle, means there should not be any racial discriminations. So it's kind of, the paradox of DEI, right? This image kind of distortion of our history. Okay. In conclusions, first, basically, cultural inclusion and tolerance. Your, inclusive attitude, tolerable attitude, behavior to others is very important. However, there is a dilemma from cultures, some cultures that conflict with universal value that we have seen, but how to overcome that kind of dilemma or a paradox? Yeah, we can overcome this dilemma by improving cultural knowledge. It is a secured cultural intelligence. And by prioritizing universal value. Okay. Thank you for your pay attention. Thank you. Bye.